In this chapter, we're going to look at ecosystem degradation and loss. I'll put this picture on here just to show you the impact or the footprint that humans have on the environment. So this is, obviously a photo from space at night showing all the light pollution from cities and that sort of thing. Um, so you can see there's parts of North America, like northern Canada and out in the west, that don't have as much light pollution as more densely populated areas do. No. So the cause of all this, we got more people, we need more resources, right? And so what are some other problems you can think of besides stressing the environment by having so many people having this unchecked population growth? So you saw on the previous slide, for most of human history, populations increasing somewhat linearly, just a little bit. And then the last 130, 150 years, we've seen a massive exponential growth in population. So what do you think this is gonna, how it's gonna affect um, the environment and other aspects? So people, society, culture. You can think of all those things as being related because they are. Okay, so now that we've come up with some other problems that might be being caused by overpopulation, how should we fix it? What are we going to do to fix the current population problem? So think about some ideas. These can be practical ideas or radical ideas. Just any idea you can think of. Try to come up with those. So we're going to have to somehow um, fix our overpopulation problem because we can't continue on our current trajectory forever. We live on a finite planet with finite resources, so something has to change, right? And so this is kind of our public policy stance in the U.S., and it's kind of ironic. So this cartoon sums it all up. So we've got the fat guy in the Hawaiian shirt in his very large car, yelling at this guy to stop cutting down that tree because we need it to protect us from the greenhouse gases. Well, this guy's riding a horse, subsistence farming, probably chopping the tree with an axe. The amount of greenhouse gases that this individual here has produced in probably 10 minutes outweighs the amount this individual produces in a year. Um, so it's kind of ironic, that we're telling people you can't have what we have. So when we damage or alter the environment, we can do it in one of two ways. We can damage damage the habitat, or we can degrade the entire ecosystem. And so what's the difference in habitat and ecosystem? Well, a habitat's going to be the physical and biological environment used by an individual, a population, or a group of species. And the ecosystem is going to include a little bit more than that. So the ecosystem is going to be a group of organisms and all their physical environment. So you can think of an ecosystem is going to contain many different habitats. Like a forest is going to contain, boulders and trees and fallen logs. Those are all separate habitats within that ecosystem. So we're going to have something like this here with these cars, that are probably leaking fluids into the stream, and that's going to be degrading the habitat. So, certain species of fishes and things like that are going to be harmed by this. But overall, there's still a stream there, and there's going to be some species that can still exist and persist. Versus in this picture here, every single tree has been cut down in the forest, and so that forest ecosystem is now gone. And so any species that relied on that ecosystem is no longer going to be able to live there. This map is a map of kind of how wild parts of the world are, how impacted by humans are these parts. And so the greener areas have little to no impact from humans, and then the darker purple areas have the most. So when you look at it, where are places that are the most impacted? So we've got the eastern U.S., Europe, India, China, right? So these more developed nations. And where is there the least impact? Really, this is a desert. This is also a big desert. This is a big rainforest. It's really cold up here and up here. This is a desert. So places that have really inhospitable environments are the only places left that are still really, really wild. So one way we degrade environments and habitats is through air pollution, right? And so air pollution in forests can often lead to significant plant die-off. It can kill a lot of trees. In the southern Appalachians, like the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, a few years ago, we began having problems with acid rain. And this acid rain killed many of the spruce and fir trees at high elevations, and so those forests are really different now than they used to be. One group of organisms that's often used to monitor air pollution are lichens, because they're really sensitive to air pollution, be that heavy metals or be that sulfur dioxide and things like that. And so scientists can go into an area and look at what kind of lichens are there and determine air quality levels from that. We have methane. That's another pretty big air pollutant. And so we had in 2015 a well that was pumping methane out of the ground in California busted and released, I'm not sure the exact amount, but thousands of cubic feet of methane at least, if not millions. And there was in fact so much methane released in this valley that people had to be evacuated because it was at those levels it was toxic and the air could be explosive. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, and so it, that release of a large amount of methane into the atmosphere increased our greenhouse gas effect. And so here's a picture from the Smokies, like I was mentioning, showing that acid rain has killed all the trees by lowering the pH. It's pretty bad. Since we're not in the classroom, we can't do the acid rain demo, but what happens is basically these things like nitrous oxide and sulfuric and sulfur dioxide are emitted when we burn fossil fuels, be that gas, oil, coal, and CO2. Anytime we burn anything is released, and this goes up into the atmosphere, mixes with rainwater, and comes back down as an acid. Something that you can try at home that's a cool, interesting demo to show this is soda, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whatever. is bubbly and fizzy because of carbon dioxide dissolved in it. And so if you take a small nail, like a finishing nail or something like that, and you sand the coating off of the nail, so it's just bare metal, and you put it in a 20-ounce bottle of soda and let it sit, it will disappear. It takes a little while, but you can try this at home. It will dissolve the nail because of the acidity of the bottle from the CO2. And so we're creating rain that's almost as acidic as pop or soda. And it rains down on these forest environments and kills everything. And that's not very good. Another major air pollutant that was super big problem are chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs as they're known. And you may have heard of the hole in the ozone layer. It's most extreme over Antarctica, and it's this big hole. Our ozone layer basically shields us from UV radiation, and it was growing and getting huge, and it was being created by CFCs. They go into the atmosphere and they chew up all the ozone molecules. Well, there's been virtually a worldwide ban on this molecule, and this was used as a refrigerant, as a propellant, for a lot of things, and it's been banned for several years now, and we see the hole in the ozone layer shrinking because these molecules, we're not putting any more CFCs into the air, so we had a worldwide ban, and now the ozone hole is shrinking, and we're going to see it close up probably in our lifetime, which is awesome. So that's a good success story, because most of our environmental issues are not going to be awesome, exciting success stories, but this is a case where policy and regulation went into effect to ban these chemicals. They became illegal, and then we saw a huge improvement. We can also have pesticides and toxins, right? So through agriculture, we use a lot of pesticides, and even just one of the biggest users of pesticides are people in their home lawns. So the lawn, like a green grassy patch at your house, a lot of people use a tremendous amount of pesticides on those, which can end up in the water. But if we look at this particular one called DDT, DDT was once used as an insecticide. They would spray it, they'd fog cities and to kill mosquitoes and that sort of thing, and farmers would use it to put on their crops to kill bugs. And so DDT was a pretty potent insecticide. But the problem was that DDT is also in high concentrations pretty potent of everything else. And we found that we were losing all of our birds. So all of the fish-eating birds, like mergansers and bald eagles and these sorts of things, their populations were crashing. And because their eggs were cracking, and nobody could figure out why for a few years, and finally it was figured out that it was DDT that caused the birds to lay eggs that didn't have thick enough shells, strong enough shells, that when they tried to sit on them to nest on them, they would break and then the young would die. So once this was banned, now we're seeing a recovery in bald eagle populations and other bird of prey populations. But why was it such a big deal? And it was such a big deal because of this process called biological magnification. So it's where that maybe in the environment, in the water, we've got very little DDT. We got 0.00005 parts per million. So in 1 million parts of water, you've got this many parts of DDT, which isn't very much. It sounds like, okay, I can drink that water. It's okay. But the plankton swimming in the water are going to be absorbing that because they're eating stuff, they're growing, they're using the water. And so now in the plankton, we've got 0.04 parts per million. Now, as we move up the food chain, the minnow that ate the plankton, it's going to have 0.23. Then the heron that eats the minnow is going to have 3.57. But then the mergansers, which is a fish-eating duck, they're going to have 22.8, and it's going to lead to massive health problems with them, maybe kill them even, if not at least make their eggs unviable. So as you move up food chains and food webs, we tend to increase the concentration of toxins and pesticides within organisms. And we, being humans, often eat things kind of far up the food chain. And so this is what the bald eagle eggs would have looked like in many other bird of prey that had high, when DDT was being used and they had high levels of DDT in their system, that would cause their eggs to not be viable. And we have these pesticides because there's some kind of pest, right? The word pest is, something we don't want that's bothering us. And so we have these chemicals to kill those things, but the consequence of using pesticides is often that we damage what are called non-target species, like the bald eagle or the merganser. And we also have the insects that we're trying to kill with the pest. They develop resistance. So we see increased resistance by the target species, so we end up having to use more, which harms the non-target species more. And so it's this vicious cycle that we often end up, our pesticides stop working. We've seen this with many agricultural pesticides. The insects have evolved resistance, so they don't work anymore. But at the consequence of, we killed off many populations of native insects trying to kill the bad ones. And one example of this is bed bugs. So DDT was really good at killing bed bugs. And if you know anyone that's had bed bugs or know anything about them, once they infest an area, they're really hard to get rid of. And so for a long time, we didn't hear about bed bugs in the US. It wasn't a thing people got. People didn't have them. But recently, we've seen a huge comeback in bed bug populations. And so, since there's bed bugs, should we use DDT again? If I had bed bugs, I would be very unhappy and I would want them gone, right? Well, we don't have to use DDT to kill bed bugs. We can kill bed bugs with heat. So if we enclose the house and heat it up to about 135 degrees, it kills all the bed bugs. And so there's other ways of dealing with it that, we don't have to bring back these really potent toxins. Another really common toxin in food is mercury. You'll see things like tuna and just fish from the Ohio River will have consumption advisories, and be like pregnant women and little kids shouldn't eat this, and it's because of mercury levels. And mercury gets released when we burn coal. A little bit gets released from volcanoes, but the vast majority comes from when we burn coal and when water runs off the mine where we mine the coal. So like Eastern Kentucky streams have fairly high levels of mercury. So that mercury then comes out into the environment, gets turned into what's called methylmercury by bacteria and the air. And that methylmercury is rapidly absorbed by biological organisms. So little plankton absorb it, and then there's a little bit there. So you can eat as many oysters, as many salmon, as many pollock as you want. You got unlimited amounts you can eat there because it's a low level of mercury. But then trout and tuna eats those, and now you can only eat it a few times a week because it's got a lot of mercury because of the bioaccumulation effect. We saw biomagnification just like DDT. So we're getting more. Right? And then we take big fish like a halibut or a pike or a shark, predatory fish that are eating these big predatory fish. And now our mercury levels are so high that we can only eat that a few times a month. Otherwise, we run the risk of having severe neurological disorders. So we see this in our own streams here, and so it's not good. If you can't eat the fish, not good. And the fish aren't very happy about having the high levels of mercury either. Another thing we can have is water pollution. So that mercury it's a toxin, but it's a form of water pollution. Something else we can have is what's called point source pollution. Point source pollution is anytime there's a ditch or a pipe or something of that nature running contaminated or polluted water into a body of water. So this is somewhat easier to regulate because if there's a pipe and stuff spraying out of the pipe, you can see, okay, where's that pipe go, what's in the water, and that sort of thing. And so we have nationwide, we have this thing called the National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System, NPDES, and so factories and things have a permit they apply for, and they get inspected, and they get to have point source pollution because biologists and scientists determine, okay, this stream can handle X amount of mercury before it's going to be really bad, and so then companies can apply to have a permit to discharge some amount of mercury um, into the water. Another big problem with water is eutrophication. If we get a lot of nutrients, um, like agricultural runoff is a big deal, like from animal waste or from fertilizer overuse that runs off, it goes into the body of water, and it's now the water has a lot of fertilizer in it, a lot of nutrients. Algae grow like crazy. This big blooming algae, and then all those algae die, and when they die, the bacteria that are eating them suck all the oxygen out of the body of water, and all the fish die. So that's eutrophication. Happens a lot around agricultural areas. We're also seeing it in the oceans at the mouth of rivers because of agricultural runoff. Um, and so there can be big algal blooms that then die and make it anoxic. And the Gulf of Mexico at the mouth of the Mississippi River has a massive dead zone where there's no marine life because of all the fertilizer runoff. And here we can see this picture. It's massive, like hundreds of square miles, that is dead because of non-point source pollution, which is just runoff from parking lots and roads and fields, and yeah, that's bad. In 2015 in West Virginia, the Elk River had a chemical spill that made the water undrinkable in several counties for several days, and it was also, if people tried to use the water to take a bath, it would give them a rash and would burn. And the company that had the spill was a proprietary chemical, and so for several weeks they wouldn't tell the public what it was. So your water's undrinkable, it burns your skin, you can't use it to take a bath, and they didn't even tell the people what it was. So that's kind of bad. So we're gonna skip that. So let's look at what roads do to a population. People, we make roads to get around, to drive places, so we make a lot of roads. And so let's imagine we got this big forest, and it's got two vernal pools, which are ponds that are wet part of the year, like in the spring, we'll say. And we got this salamander species that lives in these two vernal pools. It reproduces in the two pools. And so what roads can do, roads can hurt a population by increasing roadkill, right? Like you hit the animal with your car, so there's less of them. And it can also deter animals from crossing, because if you're a tiny salamander that lives in the leaves, you don't want to go through this big open space because it's scary, so they might not try to cross it at all. We can increase invasive species spread, because most invasive species require disturbance to get a foothold in an environment, and then they spread from there, and so a road is a big source of disturbance. And it can also cause people to overexploit resources in remote regions more, because now we have a road, we can get big trucks in there, we can get dozers in there, we can get stuff out, whereas before it was difficult to get to, so it's kind of protected. So roads do all these things to populations. So let's say salamanders every spring, they're doing this, they're going back and forth, but now we build a road. So now this population of salamanders no longer has the genes to make a light-colored salamander. So if the environment changes in such a way that the light-colored salamander is better off, this population is going to die. And then when they try to cross, they get ran over by a car. Maybe they make it and don't get ran over by a car, and they can have a gene swap. But often that's not the case. Roads also destroy nearby ecosystems by allowing people easy access to them, and just the construction of the road in general often will damage nearby ecosystems. We get invasive species like the bush honeysuckle. If you drive through central Kentucky, the entire understory of the forest is going to be basically nothing but bush honeysuckle. Another big ecosystem altering thing is a dam. So we take a stream that flows and we build a dam. It's going to disrupt the natural flow of the river for many species. If you're some kind of migratory fish that used to, you live as an adult down here and you come up here to reproduce, you can't get across this. So dams do that. One way to help this is to create these things called fish ladders on dams. And so these fish ladders allow fish to, swim up, and eventually get to the top of the dam. And these are great. Not all species are strong enough to swim up this. If you're some kind of small fish, you probably can't make it up this. You're something big like a salmon, you probably can make it up this. Um, and so fish ladders are great to have at dams, um, but they don't work for all species. Or maybe you're a turtle or a salamander or something, and you're not a strong enough swimmer to make it up this really strong current. Um, but they're still way better than nothing. Another thing that's used to help fish get up across dams, and this is kind of cool, but these salmon cannons, right? So they're used to shoot salmon over barriers upstream. But it's probably pretty traumatic for the fish. You get caught in a net, and then you get stuck in the tube, and then you get propelled through a gun. And it's expensive because you had to buy this equipment. You're paying the people to run the fish ladder, so it's an expensive thing, but it works, and it's better than nothing. And you can see at this YouTube link, you can see salmon cannons in use. There's other barriers besides just dams and roads, and we can put trash in the environment and that sort of thing. A big hot topic in our political talk right now is a border wall, and throughout much of the southwest border, we already have a border fence in place, and this makes it impassable for species that live there. There's a lot of like javelinas and ocelots and things that can't cross the fence. So it disrupts their migration patterns and that sort of thing. Power lines, like utility lines, can open up a habitat and prevent certain species from crossing, because maybe it's a creature that's really shy and it lives in the woods and it doesn't want to cross in this open area. It thinks it's going to get eaten, so it won't go in there to cross. And then certain plants that are adapted to growing in the low sunlight of the forest can't grow here because it's too bright and too sunny, and they get sunburned. And then the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it's a real famous pipeline that sits above the permafrost in Alaska. And even though it's elevated and it's above the ground, it still is a barrier for caribou because it's hard for them to get under it. And another major problem, especially with aquatic environments, is abandoned fishing line and fishing nets. These commercial nets in the oceans are really bad. It's a big net, it traps stuff, and then it dies. And so those are bad. So recycle your fishing line if you go fishing. Light pollution is a major problem for several nocturnal species, and especially baby sea turtles, because the way baby sea turtles work is they hatch out, and they try to hatch out at night so that birds can't see them to eat them as much when they come up to the surface. And then to figure out which way the ocean is, they look for the reflection of stars on the water, so they see the lights and they go to the ocean. Well, what do we do at our beaches? We build giant casinos and hotels and resorts and things, and so it's really bright. And so the little sea turtles, instead of going to the ocean, are now going to the city where they get trampled and ran over. So that's a problem. Motorized transport, has led to a lot more roadkill and boating impacts. So if you're paddling a canoe, you're probably not going to kill a manatee with it, right? But if you're in a speedboat going 60 miles an hour with a 300 horsepower motor, you might shred up a manatee with your propeller. Or like a squirrel. If you're walking on the road, you're not going to kill a squirrel. But driving your car, you're moving fast enough and a large enough thing that you can kill the squirrel. So motorized transport's led to deaths. We see increased erosion in a lot of parts of the world, and this increase in erosion is due to human activity. If we take the topsoil and we take all the trees off and we cut everything down, now the water washes the dirt away a lot more, so development increases erosion a lot. And so it often degrades ecosystems. Like putting silt and clay into water is bad for aquatic things in most places. So like in Kentucky, one of our biggest water pollutants is sediment. So the dirt that washes into the water, now instead of having all the rocks and the cracks in the rocks where all the bugs and the little fish can live, now it's filled up with mud and they don't have any place to live, and so they die. Um, and erosion can even damage, people economically and directly by like their houses. So these houses are built on this bluff, um, and erosion's causing them to fall off. And so then you're gonna have to move or be in a really dangerous place. So that kind of thing. And so some species are adapted to fire, right? So Smokey the bear or Smokey Bear has always been, only you can prevent forest fires. Don't have fires. Fires are evil and that sort of thing. But reality is a lot of ecosystems around the world historically have experienced a lot of fires. And one example is this slash pine. They have to have periodic fires, and several other species of pine for their pine cones to even open. So they can't reproduce without a fire burning their pine cones. But if we prevent all fires, they're never going to have new seedlings, and so these ecosystems are going to change and degrade. And then what happens, since we prevented fire for so many years, now there's a bunch of dead wood all over the place, and so when a fire does happen, it's massive and kills everything, as opposed to frequent fires that burn most of the fuel, being a lot less intense. And so like Great Smoky Mountains is another example of that. In 2016, there was a big wildfire, that killed, I don't know, thousands of acres or something. It's a really big area that it wiped out most of the trees because fire had been suppressed for so long in that area. There was so much fuel that the fire burned really, really hot. If you have ecosystems that burn more frequently, then the fires are less intense, and the big mature trees that are adapted to that, they don't die. We can use water in a lot of different ways. So here's a chart showing how Americans use water, on average. So you can do things, residentially to decrease this, right? We can decrease it. Like we can fix our leaky stuff. We can get a high efficiency washer. We can get a high efficiency toilet. We can get a low flow shower head. So these big things, it's simple fixes to really decrease the amount of water we use in these big areas. And with climate change, we've seen areas experiencing more and more drought, especially in the western U.S. In California and Texas and Oklahoma especially have been having major droughts. Now, I think this past year, like 2018, has been really wet, but for the 5 years prior to that, it was really, really super dry, and so these have major effects on the economies of those areas. People don't have water to drink, and agriculture uses the biggest amount of water in the U.S. So see, we got agriculture here, and worldwide agriculture is the biggie. But that urban lawn is what's going on here and going on here, right? People making their yards green in the desert, not a good idea. And other things we use water for, but that's one big source of waste that we could prevent is irrigation of lawns. We need water to irrigate crops, but maybe we could grow crops in a different place where it actually rains and we don't have to use as much irrigation. So that's the thing. So to yourself, think about these things, and so how often do you flush the toilet? Do you go with the, if it's brown, flush it down, yellow, let it mellow? Do you flush the toilet every time you use the toilet? How about that? And your dishwasher and washing machine, do you after every meal you stick 2 plates in the dishwasher, or do you wait to fill it all the way up before you run it? And likewise with the washing machine, are you efficiently using that? When you brush your teeth, do you turn the water on and let it run? Or do you turn the water on, wet your toothbrush, turn the water off, brush your teeth, and then turn it back on to rinse? Because you could save a lot of water by not leaving it run while you brush your teeth. Showers, do you just stand in the water for a long time because it's nice and warm and relaxing, or do you take a shower and get it over with? You can save a lot of water that way. Your shower head, you can put a low flow shower head on it. It reduces the water volume coming through. It'll save a lot of water that way as well. Um, the stuff we buy has a big effect on it, right? So around the world, deforestation is a major issue, especially in Borneo. So the island of Borneo in 1950 was basically a giant jungle. But since 1950, we figured out Borneo is a good place to grow stuff like rubber and palm oil. And so the forests have been cut down for agriculture mostly. And so orangutans and proboscis monkeys are both now endangered, and they're threatened with extinction because their habitat's been destroyed due to deforestation. And so we can do things, the biggest thing that we can do is don't support products that support these practices. So like palm oil is something that's put into a lot of products, especially peanut butter, and it's not needed to be there. If you buy natural peanut butter, it's ground up peanuts, you got to stir it, and that's normal. And prior to about the 1980s, all peanut butter was made that way. And then we figured out, hey, we put palm oil in it, it stays as like a goop, and we don't have to stir it. And so now that's kind of the norm for peanut butter, but that's driven a lot of this deforestation. Is basically American peanut butter. In South America, cattle farming is a big thing. They cut down the forest to grow cattle. And here's the palm oil plantations. They cut down all the forest, the rainforest. It's really super diverse, and they plant this, these plantations of palm oils, and that's really bad for the environment. Desertification is a process of where we turn arid regions into deserts. So what may have used to have been a really dry place, but it would have had grasses and shrubs and maybe cacti, we turn that into a desert where there's nothing. And so one example of this is the Aral Sea. It was sucked dry basically over 30 years because they used it for irrigation. They over irrigated with this aquifer, and so now it's dry and it's a desert. Around the world, we've got lots of areas that are seasonally dry. These could be grasslands, they could be tropical deciduous forests. And so you're like, what? Tropical forests? They keep their leaves all year long. Well, there's a lot of tropical areas that experience a wet season and a dry season. And so in those places, a lot of times the trees will lose their leaves during the dry season. So we call them a dry deciduous forest. And so that's what these tropical deciduous forests are. And then we got shrublands, and these are the most vulnerable to desertification because they're the plants that are there are maintaining, they're cooling the soil with shade. Their roots are holding the soil in place, and so we're keeping it going on. But if you put a bunch of sheep in there, or you try to do agriculture in there, then often what happens is the soil just becomes loose and dry, and we exacerbate the desert. And so with increasing desertification, most plants can't live in these super dry areas, and so it decreases biodiversity. Dredging, draining, and damming of streams makes a huge difference. And so if we look at the Kentucky waterways, they've decreased significantly since it's been settled. So historically, our rivers and streams were used for transportation. Yeah, like Lewis and Clark and Daniel Boone and all of them. They did a lot on boats and rafts. That may have hurt, like Huck Finn and all that. But now we've dammed a lot of our streams and created lakes. So that's what all these dark areas, these blue areas here are. And historically, we had a massive amount of forest cover, so all this green stuff is woodland, and the yellow is wetland. So we had a massive, Western Kentucky, a lot of wetland, and now it's basically all gone. And there's very few, there's tiny little remnants that are in, wildlife management areas, that sort of thing. And the forests have been massively reduced. So all this is due to human development. And wetlands are really useful, and they decrease flooding. and so we need them. But historically, they've been drained and dredged and filled in to make farmland, because it's also, there's high nutrient areas, and so the dirt there is really um, high in nutrients, so it makes really good agricultural land. And so we've destroyed them. Dams destroy them by flooding them and creating, changing the rivers forever. We've got invasive species coming in like zebra mussels. Um, and then if we look at these jetties, and so what jetties are where we have a freshwater, like a creek or a river, coming into the ocean. Well, they'll build these big long rock spires that go out, and their purpose is, they're what they say is to decrease beach erosion. Right? They're supposed to decrease beach erosion. But what happens is the water coming through here is coming out so hard that it just dredges a big channel and washes everything out. And what used to, all the dirt that was in that creek used to fall in here and settle out and create more land. Now it's shooting out way out in the ocean and not creating more beach. And so we're seeing the beaches erode back and back and back more. Habitat fragmentation is when you have a habitat that you chop up. Do that with roads or houses and fields and that sort of thing. And so you look at the landscape here, like that's probably forest and forest and forest, and all this used to be forest, but now it's in these little isolated chunks. And so if you're a species that lives there, it's really hard to get around. Rural Colorado. This is a county from Colorado. If we look at 1957, here's the roads, and then 94, here's all the extra roads. So the habitat's been fragmented way more. And usually habitat fragmentation makes areas inhospitable, because if we look at these two areas, they have the same amount of area, right? So 64 hectares and 8.7 times 4 here. So, no, it's not the same. No, scratch that. It's not the same amount of area. But the big square is the same amount of area. But the interior is the natural habitat, right? But if we look at, when we fragment a habitat, what's called the edge effect. So the edge here, we have not a lot. We have a lot of interior habitat that's not near the edge. But over here, anywhere an animal goes, it's going to be near the edge. And for many animals, they're kind of skittish or shy. That's really stressful for them, and they don't like edges, and so they're limited to a tiny little habitat, and they're not gonna be able to live there, and they're gonna die. Invasive species thrive more in fragmented habitats usually, so like house sparrows. They've benefited from habitat fragmentation, and bluebirds, our native species, have been harmed by it. So we see many more of these now than we do these because of habitat fragmentation. And here's the edge effect, seen played out on the landscape. So what all used to be one big massive forest, now it's all these little pieces with lots and lots of edges. It changes the microclimate because along all those edges, more sunlight's getting into the forest floor and changing it, it affects which species can live there. So these microclimate changes make a big difference. In a forest that is continuous. The forest has been there for 1,000 years and continues, so it provides a fairly stable microclimate. If it's been there, it's still going to be shady, it's still going to be cool, still that kind of thing. Versus if we have a fragmented forest, it's no longer going to be shady. We're going to have more variation in temperature, more light, less humidity. And many species like spiders, ferns, and amphibians require the protection of a forest canopy and a dense forest canopy and the shade to be able to live, because they need it to be kind of moist. But when we fragment the habitat, it's no longer that way. It gets drier and more light, and so then they die. So the Allegheny wood rat is listed as a near threatened species now. This is, some people call them pack rats. They live in the Appalachians, and it's due to habitat fragmentation. One thing that we can do that's not often done is we can make animal underpasses and animal overpasses. So it's like we can make either a culvert for animals to cross the road in, and use fencing and stuff to kind of funnel them to that point, so that now instead of crossing the road, they're going to cross the culvert and not get hit by cars and have a pathway to cross. So that's really good. In some countries, they do animal overpasses, which is like a bridge over the road, but it's vegetated and works in a similar fashion. But this is usually only these underpasses are usually only done when the animal is big enough to cause economic damage to the vehicles when they hit it, to make people care enough for it to happen. If it was salamanders and small turtles, they usually don't care. But if it's like moose, they're like, okay, we don't want to hit the moose. So that's something. Another species that's really affected are river dolphins in China. They're thought to maybe be extinct now, due to fragmentation of their habitat by dams, because they live in rivers and not lakes, and so that's really bad. Reindeer migrate a lot. In fact, the longest overland migration of any species are by the reindeer in the north. They go like 2,000 miles every year. And so if their route gets blocked for some reason, maybe they cross a river all the time, and then we decide to build a dam and make that river into a lake, and they can't get across the lake now. They would die from starvation. Box turtles that live in fragmented habitats, they look for food and mates and that sort of thing. So they're going to cross the road, and then they're going to get hit by a car, increasing their population. So what are some more consequences of this fragmentation? If we increase the edge effects, we also increase wildfires. And you're like, what? How's that? Well, when you let more light into the forest floor, you grow more vegetation, and you decrease the humidity in the forest. So now we're getting more brush down low, and we're making it drier. And so that both of those things allow for fire to spread more rapidly. Invasive species are often found along edges a lot more frequently, and they can spread from those areas. Things like Lyme disease are more prevalent in areas with higher fragmentation. So if we see big continuous forests, there's lower rates of people getting Lyme disease there than there are in fragmented habitats. And so this idea of having habitats that are fragmented, different little places, they kind of can act like an island. Like you get a little patch of woods in the middle of giant fields. That little patch of woods is sort of like an island, and so it came up with this idea, the island biogeography model. And we use this to predict where species are going to be endemic. And so what the trends here basically say, and it was originally developed on oceanic islands, but now we can use it. It's been applied to mainland places in fragmented habitat. But basically what it says is that smaller islands are going to have less species and a higher extinction rate. Just because they're smaller, they got lower population sizes for those species, and they got low habitat diversity. Colonization of new species onto an island is going to be highest for those islands closer to the mainland, because it's easier for stuff to get there. These circles where they're on here, the white circles, represent equilibrium points where colonization rates and extinction rates are equal. And then equilibrium numbers of species is going to be greatest on a big island near the mainland and lowest on a small island farthest from the mainland. So it kind of makes sense, right? If you're blowing in the wind being dispersed from the mainland, and the island's bigger, it's a bigger target to hit. If the island's closer, it's more likely you'll hit it. So so this is intuitively makes sense. And this is they looked at lots and lots of islands, and if you measure the area of the island and the number of species, it increases linearly like this when you logarithmically transform it. So this is a log scale, right? So 1, 10, 100,000, 10, 100, 100,000, 10. So these are both log transformed axes. And so we see, it goes in a straight line. And so this is around the world, we see the same trend. As the islands get bigger, you get more species as they get closer to the mainland. There's some assumptions of this model, and that's going to be that groups of species of broad ranges are going to have a lower rate of extinction than those of the narrow range. Because if you're found all across the entire island and a hurricane hits one side of it, well, you're still on the other side. But if you got a narrow geographic range and you were only living on that one side of the island and a hurricane hits it, well, now you might be extinct. And then if some species is endemic to a particular habitat, if that habitat gets destroyed, that species gets eliminated, which is, reasonable. And areas of habitat that get eliminated are random. By natural forces on these islands, it's random which one's going to get hit by a hurricane or whatever. We assume that that's all random. And then the degree of habitat fragmentation that exists might affect extinction rates. So if there's more fragmentation, it'll increase the rates. If there's less, it'll decrease them. So that's the assumptions of the island biogeography. And that's used a lot to predict which species are where in these fragmented habitats. And so that sums up Chapter 8. So you'll want to complete the Chapter 8 quiz on Blackboard if you haven't done that. And read over Chapter 9 over exploitation for next time.